Across the world and throughout history, the position of men and women has been almost exactly the same. Everywhere, the father is the head of the family. He works outside the home, he makes money, controls the finances, makes all the decisions. The woman gives birth, raises children, and takes care of the family. And this has been that way for centuries.
Historically, this division of roles has been replicated from the family to schools, to businesses, to political and religious institutions, with men making the major decisions that shape our world.
A lot of things that we take pride in, whether it's art or technology or science or historical events, are shaped by men. When you train boys and men to be courageous, to be ambitious, to take risks, to be creative, to be innovative, of course they achieve. They're at least encouraged to achieve, and many of them do. But half of the population has not had its share of inclusion, achieving and shaping aspects of the world in which we live. Look at all the problems we are facing. The decisions that are being made are not the decisions we need. We have to create a vision for the future that we want together, men and women. To make it work for everybody, to do that, we really have to step back, take a look, and see how is it that we have gotten to where we have been, and how can we make real change.
Patriarchy always has been, and still is, promoted and sustained by religion, culture, tradition, and by the laws and governance that reproduce and reinforce it.
Studies show that nearly 90% of the people of the world believe that they are affiliated to some religious belief or other. And they do, in many ways, affect how people think. And almost all religions had the sectarian division between what men should be and what women should be.
The family is the primary unit of society, and it is the first place where women's roles are constrained and defined from their very birth. And I think the customs in every culture are key to influencing the position, status, freedom, opportunities for women in those societies. It's not like some particular set of men decided that, now we're going to kind of control and oppress women from here on out. And neither is it so clear-cut that women may not have been part of that in certain ways.
The mothers actually preach to their daughters saying, "My daughter, this is the way you're to behave. You just accept whatever the man says. This is the way things are supposed to be."
Before the 19th century, women in most countries were not considered full citizens. The majority couldn't own property. And if a woman inherited any assets, they were transferred to her husband when she married. Before the 20th century, no woman had the right to vote or hold office. Women in Switzerland didn't even get the right to vote until 1971. For more than 100 years, women activists have been fighting to overturn gender discrimination. While many gains have been achieved, equality is still not a reality. The primary obstacles? In some countries, discriminatory family laws. Globally, an entrenched patriarchal culture. Even now, in the 21st century, millions of women still wake up every day in a world where they do not have basic equal rights or opportunity. And not just in developing countries.
To this day, there's no paid maternity leave in the United States. There's no affordable childcare. And with women still making less than men for the same jobs, it makes it very difficult.
As things change in society, as modernization takes place, laws change. The only laws that are very difficult to change are laws that have to do with the status of women. They are the foundations of male control. Women's sexuality and reproductive rights, for instance, are a very important element of control.
Abortion rights are under attack. What do we do? Stand up, fight back.
A woman's control over her own body has been under siege by traditional forces for decades. And with extremism on the rise, this not only impedes progress, but threatens to reverse rights that have already been achieved.
We're seeing fundamentalist movements rising within all of the world's great religious traditions, including Christianity, Judaism, Islam, and others. So this is a global problem.
They begin by using religion as a basis for restrictions on women. We've seen that happen in Yemen, we've seen it in Nigeria, and we now see it in many countries.
Fundamentalism is about using an interpretation of religion, not as a spiritual project, but as a coercive mechanism to take power in society and in the state. And I think that's why secularism plays such a key role here in the struggle against fundamentalism.
Family laws are very important because it is the law that defines the relations, especially in the private sphere, that have an impact then in the public sphere. It says who does what, who controls who and what.
Sharia is the basis for many family laws in Muslim-majority countries. While laws differ from country to country, most deny women equal status. In some countries, a woman of any age cannot marry, take a job outside of the home, attend school, go out in public or travel without the permission of her male guardian. A wife must obey her husband, and because she is not considered a full citizen, she cannot pass her nationality on to her foreign-born spouse or children. A husband is allowed to have multiple wives. He can divorce for almost any reason, and he maintains custody rights to the children. A wife, on the other hand, has very few rights to divorce. Abuse or marital rape are generally not considered just cause. When activists in Morocco campaigned to reform family laws, they met with strong resistance.
Et qu'est-ce que nous disaient les islamistes conservateurs? Si vous donnez le droit aux femmes au divorce, elles vont divorcer, vous allez avoir un taux de divorce, ça va être catastrophique. Et même certains magistrats qui disaient, donc elles sont très émotives, donc il ne faut pas leur donner ce moyen.
But more than a decade after reform, statistics tell a different story.
Le nombre de divorces au Maroc, depuis la réforme de 2004, n'a pas cessé de baisser. C'est-à-dire que les gens divorcent moins, même si maintenant les femmes ont le droit au divorce.
Because family laws are based on religious texts and interpreted by individual judges or clerics, their opinions can differ widely. In some countries where there are multiple religions like India, Indonesia, and Lebanon, this is particularly challenging.
One family court would decide that child custody age is 2. Another one would decide that it's 12. One grants divorce under certain conditions, one doesn't. This is to the benefit of some men who can afford it, which means if you're a Catholic and you won't be divorced in your Catholic family law, many men actually opt to become Muslims and divorce under the Muslim law and then come back to being Christian. This situation of 17 religious family courts, all of them considering women to be subservient to men, has hurt many women and many children.
Si l'épouse décède, l'époux a une part très importante de l'héritage de sa femme. Si c'est lui qui décède, la veuve n'a que le 1/8 Ce qui est absolument dramatique parce que souvent les femmes veuves se retrouvent dans la rue.
When I went to resolve my father's estate under Algerian family law, the issue came up that my male sibling would receive twice what I would receive. And the legal official raised his finger to the sky and said, "Madam, you cannot argue with God." And that is when I realized the vital importance of secular family law.
أول شيء كان لما يجي حدا أو إنه يجي حدا بده يخطبني وأنا أحكي لا.
Where are you taking me? They just said, come, come, and then they performed the wedding.
Some of these age-old customs and laws are not just inequitable. They also condone violence against women.
They are in a situation where they do not have choice. They are forced into such marriages by their parents, and everything that is happening in such marriages is violence against them. It is sexual violence, it's slavery, it's rape.
For a long time, the feminist movement focused on issues around women as women's problems. But we realized that they had ignored the men who are the perpetrators of the violence and yet who are always a beneficiary of the system. So we work against all forms of violence against women and children in Kenya. Kwa hivyo si huyu ameoa mtumwa. Yaani ameoa kutumiwa vile anavyotaka, alishwe, apewe mimba, azae, apike chakula, achunge ng'ombe. Kwa hivyo kuoza watoto wadogo inawafanya pia wanakuwa kama watumwa.
Anuni اللي دقيبني طبعا كيك وانا كربان. أنا دقيب فرق مسجيه يو دقيب بسيني دركيه بريت فرق سجيه. دي دكتور وانا مجلسة كفي على تمرت انت سلامي وست.
They are deprived of their education, their family life, their possibilities to develop as empowered girls within the family.
मुझे लगा कहीं चंदा ही रहती शादी क्यों की समझ में
While many countries have passed laws that set the age of marriage at 18, fundamentalists often cite culture and tradition to circumvent the law.
Subordination within the family is very much tied up with the idea that men has the right to punish women. Domestic violence has to do with power. And this, when it is backed up by legislation that places him as the head of the family, becomes very dangerous for women.
In Brazil, 70% of men who are violently assaulted are attacked in the street. For women, 70% are attacked at home by men they have a relationship with.
Mi savais mbitim wipe blow me, and also me master me man.
This has to do with centuries of domination, cultural domination, by all sort of cultural productions where man is always in the role of aggressor, by this building of masculinity associated with power over women in different ways.
There is a saying in Terra dos Machos, Brazil, if a man sleeps around with other women, it's a sign of masculinity. If a woman is an adulteress, she pays with her life.
murdered to protect family honor.
By 20 members of her own family.
Disobedience is a dishonor.
So-called crimes of passion and honor killings have existed in many religions and cultures dating back to ancient times.
In these situations, the family law is giving authority to commit these crimes and to defend the honor of the family, despite of the fact that the price of this honor is the life of the woman.
Inappropriate dress, sexual relations outside of marriage, or just the suspicion of it, and not accepting an arranged marriage are some of the typical defenses for honor killing.
This person will not feel respectful in the society if he didn't commit this type of crime and clean the honor of the family.
Family laws are actually the best example of state-sanctioned violence. Unless the state offers protection from violence, protection from discrimination, and egalitarian civil laws, it is actually, the way I see it, condoning violence.
Legislative changes are really the basic step toward eliminating violence. And of course, the whole culture of violence that is encouraged by the way people are brought up, by the way masculinity is defined.
When you have massive power imbalance, it prevents women accessing rights. And that's then reflected in the labour market, and from the labour market into governance structures, and it becomes self-fulfilling. So essentially, if the family unit does not provide for real equality and accessing real rights, that will be reflected right through society.
A recent study by researchers from Brigham Young University and Texas A&M presented empirical evidence that inequity in family law is significantly associated with higher levels of state fragility and instability.
So there's a direct connection between the status of women in the family and whether a society is a peaceful one or a violent society.
In Rwanda, a Christian-majority country, most people depend on land for their livelihood. Before reform, women could not own land. Today, they can.
We used kind of our soft power to lobby for change and to convince the opinion leaders it's a win-win. It's not an easy process, I must say, because these traditions take long to go, but we know that we are on the right track, and we've given the woman a very important tool to use for her livelihoods.
Even though Turkey has had a secular civil code since 1926, activists spent decades fighting patriarchal family laws. Reform efforts did away with the head of household concept and achieved another important victory.
The joint property regime that was introduced, which grants a woman divorce 50% of the accrued assets after marriage. It not only empowers women, but it also recognizes women's unpaid labor.
Activists in many countries have made incremental gains in overturning discriminatory laws. But passing a law is one thing. Changing culture is another.
To make the laws become meaningful on the ground, there's really a need to do a lot of work within communities. Before the laws, during the laws, when the laws have been made. When the communities believe in something, then the sustainability of that something is much more important.
Organizing knowledge and information, unrelentless lobbying, and actually not to despair. It's a very long-term process. It has happened in other countries. It can happen everywhere else.
The best way is documenting cases, reporting on these cases, and raising awareness about the disconnect with human rights. And of course, you can convince men also by talking about their daughters.
bringing men on board within the household, in the community, in schools, in religious institutions. Everywhere, in every religion, there are very progressive voices. And so that becomes another area for advocacy and change.
You must have in your toolkit a way to work at the most profound levels of what we call culture. So what else are we using? Are we using art? Are we using drama? Are we using music? Are we using the tools that touch our heart, not just the tools that touch our brain?
There are a lot of men among the younger generation who are thinking differently, who are working with young women in an egalitarian fashion. So culture is changing, and it does make a difference.
Liberation has a way of bringing out the best in men and women alike. Gender equality is not a war of the sexes, but it's a war against oppression.
I think men are as much victims of patriarchy as women are, and we rarely think about it in that way. But in fact, I do think men find themselves extremely circumscribed by the conditions of patriarchy in ways that we rarely talk about, but I think are profoundly important if we want to change the rules of the game.
Taking a stance against fundamentalism is not akin to an anti-religion stance. What we truly need is a coalition of both religious believers, non-religious believers, and people all across the spectrum who are committed to human rights, who are committed to the right to freedom of religion, and who are also committed to equality.
You have to start with yourself, you have to start with your family, you have to start with how you raise your kids.
So if we get it right within the family, if we get the individual rights properly respected, we get equality, we will then start spreading that into other institutions, and organically it will lead to transformation.
We need to act more global. There has been an awakening around the world. So there's no going back in what we have achieved. There's no going back in the demand for moving forward.
There's hardly anyone on earth who doesn't want to be free. There's no one on earth who doesn't want to have a say in their own life decisions. Where women have had more opportunities and been able to mobilize those opportunities, it makes a difference. If we learn to recognize our power, to feel it, to internalize it, to exert it, we can do it. We have to begin at the level of the family and the culture that dominates the relationships in the family. To do that, we have to bring the men in so that we work together toward a different world, a world of inclusion of all, justice for all, equality for everyone.